all fine and good to denounce fossil fuels and call for the switch to renewable energy. Who's going to pay for that switch, though? 2 years to the day since 195 nations sealed the Paris Agreement, pledging to do what it takes to stop the planet from overheating any further, world leaders are back in the French capital for the One Planet Summit, the aim to finance that switch to renewables. The cost can be counted not in millions, not in billions, but in trillions of dollars. Big announcements have been made. The World Bank to stop financing oil and gas exploration and extraction. Some major banks and insurance companies announcing divestment from fossil fuels. And workshops studying ways to spur green investment. So is the best approach carrot or stick? Do governments regulate, provide tax breaks for clean energy, issue green bonds? Do you let the private sector take the lead? And can it all work without the United States, the world's second biggest carbon producer, whose president, well, doesn't see the point? Today in the France 24 debate, who's going to pay for it? And talking about it with us, Erik Solheim, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, or you say United Nations Environment these days.
Absolutely.
That's right. There seems to be a Norwegian conspiracy here today, because we also, in the company of Harald Bjugstad Holm, Chief Sustainability Officer for Norway's largest private asset management firm, Storebrand. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, in a moment, I'm going to be asking you about your job description and what it entails, because I know that there's a lot of people from the private sector today with that same job description. Also with us, Lauren Blackford, president of a U.S. environmental group, the Sierra Club. In a word, tell us what the Sierra Club is.
The Sierra Club is the United States' largest and oldest grassroots environmental organization. We have chapters across the country.
All right, and the U.S. well represented, even if the U.S. president isn't here in the French capital. Also joining us, Vikram Wij, Director of Climate Finance and Policy for the World Bank's investment arm, the IFC. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Paris.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Before we get down to business, let's just clear the air about global warming. We can show you a NASA video that charts how the past 5 years are the hottest on record. These are the records dating back to the 19th century. And you'll see that anything that's in yellow or orange or red is over 2% or 1 or 2 degrees normal. And that is the situation in 2016. It's got France's president sounding the alarm.
We're losing the battle. Make no mistake, we're having a good time, it's nice to meet you, and today's a great day because like-minded people are together or are getting to know one another. And that seems great, but we're losing the battle. Those before us had an opportunity, but didn't know as much as we know now. But over the past 20 years, we've come to know more and more.
Erik Solheim, is it something that you can see with the naked eye in your native Norway, the planet getting warmer?
There is this contrast and paradox that on one hand, the Mother Earth is really coming back on us. We saw the hurricanes in the Caribbean, the big floods in South Asia, landslide in Africa. The Mother Earth is really pushing back on us. On the other hand, we are moving fantastically positive to taking action. And of course, President Macron needs to kind of make the alarm bell. But overall, we are now in the midst of the shift. You posed the question, what is the price to be paid? The answer is, there is no price to be paid. Solar and wind cannot compete with coal everywhere in the world on price. We knew that it was much more environment friendly. We knew that it was much better for our health. But now we can invest in solar and wind, basically sound economy. That's the change. So there is no price to pay. It's just to make the shift.
When he says we're losing the battle, is that just to grab headlines?
It's a mix. We are not going as fast as we need to go, and we need to make sure that the transition helps those that are most vulnerable. So many people are suffering. We have seen here in the United States, we've seen the hurricanes, the fires. So in that sense, yes. On the other hand, the transition is happening. And as we just heard, it's price competitive. There are many people that want this to happen, so it will happen. We just need to accelerate.
Need to accelerate. Vikram Wij, many people scratching their heads. We just had a UN summit a month ago in Germany, in Bonn. Why so soon afterwards here in Paris? And Emmanuel Macron making this entirely about financing. Was he right to schedule this so close to the Bonn summit?
Look, it's the 2-year anniversary of the Paris agreement, so there couldn't be a better time to sort of take stock and to essentially underscore the urgency of how much more needs to get done to scale and at speed. So the fact that he's doing it is not inconsistent with what we saw at COP23. There were 2 zones. The biggest buzz was in the zone where it was the private sector and the commercial players who were there. The negotiation was just discussing sort of the rule book, so to speak. So, no, I think this builds, in fact, on the momentum of the formal process.
Harold Bugstad-Holm, when you think back to 2 years ago, in relation to what Vikram just said, how is it different now?
Well, I think Mr. Macron has said it quite clear. It's enough talk, it's time for action. And I think 2 years ago, we had a unique situation here. The world agreed on a target. And what happened the last 2 years is that we have moved to actions, concrete actions. And you had several news coming out from the summit today, which is showcasing just that. It's time for action.
Some say, well, that announcement by the World Bank saying it's going to divest from 2019 from all fossil fuel projects with certain exceptions, they say.
Not invest anymore in upstream oil and gas, which is a little different than divesting. So the existing portfolio will play out as it does, but no new investments.
It's not a major aspect of your portfolio, is it, oil and gas? I mean, how much of a hit is it?
It's not a huge part of the portfolio, but I think it is an attractive part of the business that is willingly being given up in order to underscore what is the sentiment in the shift towards a low-carbon resilient economy. So in that sense, I think it's big for an organization that is focused on development in countries where there is a lot of reliance still in these kind of fossil fuels for them to advance and develop.
And inside the bank, inside the IFC, is there a bit of apprehension thinking, well, if we don't get in on these projects, someone else will?
And look, that may well be reality. But the question is, we do have limited capital, and our role is catalytic. So what should we be using our capital for? And the focus is, as Eric said earlier, we should be leading the market in the existing technologies whose prices are coming down and new technologies that are around the corner, from energy storage to electric vehicles.
All right, this summit, a prelude to next year's COP24 UN summit in Poland, where world leaders aim to spell out concretely how they're going to be covering the costs. We can show you right now, cross over to Emmanuel Macron and listen to the French president speaking.
Welcome you all in here in Paris. Now we're talking about financing these projects, public funding. I talked about the commitment of France. France has decided to reorient part of its financing and take additional commitments towards the projects, but there's also private funding, and I think a lot of work has been made on regulations, on sovereign funds by philanthropists, and I would like to thank all of you who are involved in this matter, because if there are any changes that are possible to regulations, it's all very fine. But the core of the matter, as the Secretary General of the United Nations very rightly said earlier on, Antonio Guterres said we need to green finance, make finance greener and make the modes of funding projects more green. So this is what we're going to talk about now in this panel. I would like to thank him for using this opportunity in a way to make very strong commitments in the matter. Bill Gates and Mark Bloomberg in particular.
So, Mr. Gates, I know that adaptation is your priority. So how do you plan to address it?
You know, if we look at who's going to suffer from climate change, unfortunately, it's the extreme poor who are overwhelmingly subsistence farmers. And what happens with climate change is that some years the rains don't come, some years they come and flood the fields, and so that level of uncertainty creates malnutrition and even in some cases starvation. And so we really owe it to those poor farmers to help them out. That is the biggest problem that we've got in the next several decades. And so our commitment, the commitment of the Gates Foundation, is to work with those farmers and dramatically increase their productivity. To give them new seeds that are drought tolerant, seeds that can deal with heat, to help train them. And so with that additional productivity, they'll be able to have a buffer stock and not suffer from the more variable weather that they're going to deal with. Our commitment over the next 3 years is to give a total of $300 million. We have other partners who are going to come along on this, and so we think we can have a huge impact on getting great seeds out and avoiding those huge negatives of climate change.
I think it's enough, or that more is done, but it's already a lot. But very briefly, sir, because I know your time is precious.
Well, I think with what some of the other partners are doing that gets this up over $650 million, it is pretty dramatic. It really goes back to the 1960s and 70s when some of the leading foundations helped put forward the Green Revolution. And the world went from expecting lots of starvation in Asia to actually increasing nutritional levels. Here, Africa's the big challenge, getting out to those farmers, getting the seeds that are adapted to their needs. I think this is a fantastic initiative, particularly with what Europe and France are doing to match our commitment here, bringing all of our expertise in agriculture, which together with health is what we specialize in the most. And yes, I think we can have a dramatic impact.
Thank you very, very much. I know your time is precious, but ladies and gentlemen, Bill Gates, thank you so much, sir. I would like to welcome someone here on the stage who's very important to me for a lot of reasons. To start with, he's my boss. But, dear Mike, you're also leading the good work.
All right, you're seeing some of the panelists, and there you saw Bill Gates, the former Microsoft CEO, now head of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation there, talking about after the remarks by the French president, the host of the One Planet Summit. Eric Solheim, I just want your reaction to what we just heard. Your organization based in Nairobi, UN Environment. We've been talking about financing of solar panels, and there we heard Bill Gates talking about financing of seeds for farmers.
Bill Gates got it exactly right. I mean, those who really will suffer from climate change are, of course, the poorest. I mean, the richest always find a way to avoid it. We today announced UN Environment with BNP Paribas, I think it's the biggest bank in Europe, a new finance facility, and BNP Paribas will make $10 billion available. This is huge, to invest in small-scale farmers in Indonesia and in India, to make them take the agriculture into a much more environment-friendly agriculture, improve the productivity so the families will make more money, better for the environment, but also reducing enormous subsidies for fertilizer, and which we do not need. So this is really a win-win-win proposition, because BNP Paribas, being a huge bank, they cannot have a small-scale farmer in India or Indonesia as a customer. So we have a way to make that big money help the small farmer.
And from your long experience at summits like this one, where there are big pledges with lots of numbers, with lots of zeros behind them, do people deliver?
Yes, I think we will deliver. I mean, true, you're right. There are some agencies or presidents who make promises which are empty. But when we get into this practical partnership between governments and private sector actors, I think we will deliver. But of course, at the end of the day, we will not deliver unless we make this profitable, make this part of the normal business. We need to get out the message. There is nothing wrong with making a profit or making the world a better place. The more we can make it profitable to go green, to go into solar and wind and assist the productivity of small-scale farmers, the better it is. What's wrong in the world is that you can make a profit on destroying the environment or a profit on making evil weapons.
So that brings us back to the question of why the summit's taking place. It sounds a bit like a green Davos, right, where you get the private and public sector together to make deals.
Well, I think what Mr. Solheim here is saying is completely right. It's Earlier, it was about millions. Now it's about billions and trillions. And it's about how we're moving the big money. It's about how sovereign wealth funds can have a complete sustainability strategy when they invest. It's about us making a fossil-free fund which can handle larger amount of money so we can get that shift towards a more sustainable future.
All right, let's go look at a concrete example about this. All the talk about ensuring the saving the planet being good for business. Erna Gunke has a look.
It's a train used for renovating railways. In order to maintain high-speed rail services, this machine removes old tracks to replace them with new ones. But there's something special about this project. It's funded by green bonds, or bonds whose proceeds are used to finance environmentally friendly projects. SNCF, France's state-owned railway company, is a worldwide leader in the use of green bonds. The company has already raised 2.5 billion euros with them to renew its infrastructure.
The funds we've raised, thanks to green bonds, have been allocated to projects that have reduced a total of 2.9 tons of CO2 over 40 years.
But green bonds are just one of many ways for companies to combat climate change. Local governments, businesses, and banks are scaling back investment in projects that involve the use of fossil fuels.
We've decided to decrease support for energy sources with high greenhouse gas emissions and also to significantly increase our support for renewable energy. So in October, we announced that we will no longer finance oil sands or shale gas.
Despite this shift in the business and finance sectors, environmental organizations remain skeptical. French banks recently allocated 10 billion euros for the construction of new coal plants.
Yeah, Lauren Blackford, when are you raising an eyebrow when you see a report like that one? It seems does it seem to you like an infomercial, or is it really happening?
There's a mix. It's our job. Another important role here is civil society, and it is our job to hold everybody accountable. And we are very busy holding governments accountable and holding banks accountable. And we love the pledges that they make, and we will be there to knock on the door and make sure that they deliver.
Yeah, to make sure they deliver. What have you noticed so far? Because people say, "Oh yeah, we're going green." They make a big announcement. They publicize it widely because it looks great. Yeah. Are people sort of fudging a little bit the truth as to how green they're going?
Sometimes what the executives say are not the same things that their lobbyists in Washington say. On the other hand, the commitments are real. The green bonds are real. They're financing real projects. They're making a real difference. Divestment is real. We saw announcements today from major institutions. We saw 200 investors commit to the 100+ action and holding emitters accountable. So I do think...
including, by the way, insurance giants. Why does that matter? To explain it for our viewers.
Who pays? When you look at insurance, property, they pay for the damage. It's incredibly costly. We think of the damage that's happened just this year, and insurance companies, they're looking to the future. They're paying the bill, so they have a very strong interest in making this transition as quickly as possible.
So picking up on what Harold Bjugstad-Holm said, when you compare what's concretely being discussed today or what's being done today with 2 years ago today when that Paris Agreement was signed, how different is it?
I think the commitments are increasing. We would like to see them increase further than they are. But as we see the price for renewable energy changing, I mean, once you get to a place where it's cheaper, then the transition gets a lot faster. And then we do see the financial institutions pulling away from fossil fuel funds. And so in the United States, going back to 2010, half of the coal fleet has either been retired or is committed to be retired. And that's partly from financial institutions deciding that that's not what they want to fund.
Harold, what is a chief sustainability officer? Well, that's your job description.
It's come some way from what it used to be. It used to be about corporate social responsibility, about philanthropy, about how you can be a good company. At least for us, I can talk for Storebrand, it's now about how to integrate sustainability in the core strategy and in the product you offer. So it's about how you become a sustainable business through how you operate your business and what kind of products you offer.
And it's changed to the point where you're no longer you're now like your office is next to the CEO's office, whereas before you were out on the different floors.
I'm actually also the chief advisor to the CEO. So yes, I'm sitting opposite to him, but my role is mainly in the sustainability sphere of the operating of the business. But yes, it has definitely come into the boardrooms and into the leaders.
And following up from what Lauren said, Norway, which has the world's, or certainly Europe's and perhaps the world's most powerful sovereign wealth fund, thanks to oil, announced earlier this year that it's completely divesting from oil investments. Explain to us how that's going to work.
Actually, it's very rational to do so. We've been provoking this for quite some time. The very nature of the fund was to spread the risk. And when you take up oil with one hand and you invest in oil companies with the other, the same money, you don't spread the risk. So it's all about how much exposure you have to the industry, and Norway as a whole has overexposure because we have so much oil. The Norwegian business life is so dependent on oil, so we can't. It's completely rational not to invest those money into the oil and gas sector. And the good thing now is that it's possible to do so as well. We've shown that through our products.
All right. We've seen, though, that right now the price of oil is relatively low compared to what it was a few years back. If the price goes up, do you see Norway starting to be more aggressive when it comes to drilling, to the kind of things we see in other countries like shale and shale gas and oil?
I think there is one big issue for Norwegian oil drilling, and that is how far up in the Arctic do we want to go? My advice is this is the area which is extremely vulnerable. When I was environment minister in Norway in the past, when we had some small oil spills in the Oslo fjord, there was no technology of any sort to pick up the oil when there was ice in winter. And there's no such technology to do it in the Arctic. So we should not go up in the Arctic. That's in my view, big issue. And I may also compliment private sector is here ahead of government and head of the sovereign wealth fund. Storebrand, which he represents, has been well ahead of, it's a private company, well ahead of the government, even when I was in government. So compliments to them.
Vikramwich, did you bring your crystal ball with you for this discussion in terms of, because we're having this discussion at a time when the price of oil, what is it right now? Like 65. Yeah, it's gone up, right? So it was below 50 at one point. What happens if it hits 100 again?
Look, it's an opportunity. One, every country should be using the lower oil prices to start getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies. That segues into putting a price on carbon, so you start sending the signal to the market so that we can start shifting even more finance into sort of the low carbon resilient investments that we need to make. And building on what Lauren said, I mean, green bonds are real. Just today we announced the largest green bond fund, and we are talking about emerging markets here. We partnered with Amundi, who's one of the larger French asset managers, and we are working with them to start working with banks in emerging markets, which is all we focus on, to start investing their money into green projects. Back that up into an aggregated fund, $2 billion from Western investors that is going to start flowing. So the opportunity is huge. I think Eric said something about the price of solar and wind. It needs to be de-risked, no doubt about it, because emerging markets are fraught with their own risks. That's the role we are the largest multilateral development bank that's focused on that. We just did a study just before COP23 looking at what happened, what is the amount of money needed if all the countries, developing countries, needed to meet their targets under the Paris Agreement. and it's in the trillions. So it's an opportunity at this point that we need to sort of capitalize on, and we need to do it quickly. So that's really what I would say is, you know what, bring it on. Let's go to oil at 100, and you will see renewables flourish even more, and you will actually be able to take the savings and do a lot more with it than we have been.
Has this swing to the private sector gone faster than you thought?
The momentum has actually been very positively surprising. You could feel it in Paris at COP21. I was lucky enough to be there then. I'm lucky enough to be here. The shift it's moved to the C-suite. There is no doubt about it that we are talking CEOs. You saw the AXA CEO today make the kind of announcements he did. Every big CEO, every big company, every big bank is looking at this at the C-suite level. So yes, the momentum is here. It's real. We see it in emerging markets. We see them looking at this as an opportunity to leapfrog development away from fossil fuel use into what are the technologies of the future. So fantastic momentum. We need to build on it, sustain it.
Fantastic momentum. We've seen, though, this year, the capital of your native India, which has been blanketed in residents there telling us the worst smog they've seen, you know.
I was in Delhi 3-4 weeks ago when that peaked. Yes, it is absolutely, it's an issue.
When's it going to get better?
It is going to, oh, look, that crystal ball I didn't bring with me, right? So what you need is actually governments focusing on how they are going to address this issue, invest in pollution. It's not just about climate, but it is about pollution. Delhi is affected by crop burning and transport particulates. So yes, let's start shifting transport away from fossil fuels. Let's look at future healthcare savings. What if we could capitalize future healthcare savings and invest that in pollution prevention today? Breathe better bonds, perhaps, right? Which then work with cities to address this pollution, improve the life and longevity of its denizens. So there you have it.
Eric Solheim, on this point, it makes total sense what Vikram is saying. Nonetheless, countries like India are saying, hey, we still have to develop our economy, and we're not going to shut down coal plants for the time being. There's nothing we can do about it.
But they do. This is a European perspective which don't really catch what's happening now, particularly in China, but also in India. They're closing down, they're moving, and Prime Minister Modi of India has made the International Solar Alliance with exactly President Macron. If you look to some of the southern states of India, they have the highest economic growth on the planet, and they're doing it by solar. India has the first all of solar airport in the world in Kochi in Kerala. They have the biggest individual solar plants in Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. They are moving very, very fast. We just haven't grasped it in Europe. And if I may add, I'm just back from Beijing. I spent the 3 last days there. So the sky was blue throughout. Not to say that it will be that forever in Beijing, but the pollution in China is coming down at the speed, in the same speed as China brought people out of poverty. They are now bringing environment solutions. And the dedication of the top leadership, President Xi Jinping of China, spoke more of the environment in the party congress 6 weeks back than any leader anywhere in the world. Bloomberg, American, figured out that he spoke more about the environment than about the economy. The shift is so fast, but we haven't really grasped it as yet in Europe, and it's both about China and India.
But in all fairness, they're going to need help.
They're going to need help.
And they're going to need money, and they're going to need some concessional finance in order to manage the risks. So it's real for them. We were in Delhi for our flagship Climate Business Forum, and ministers were involved, industrialists was involved. Everybody realizes the opportunity, but they're asking the same question. Why should we be the first country or the one who cannot use fossil fuels to develop? So it's a fair question, but we have to help them find the right path to actually capitalizing on the opportunity.
Are there other ways to put the planet on the grid? Because countries like India, it's, you know, and many of the viewers we have in Africa, they want electricity. And are there different ways of putting people on the grid?
Well, sure. So you think of what happened with cell phones, right? And in developing countries, they leapfrogged and they went straight to cell phones rather than landlines and adopted them very quickly. And so you can see the same with energy and decentralized energy and local energy. We're seeing that some in the United States, but much more so in developing countries. And so once again, you have an opportunity in places that have no energy access, that don't have a grid, to go straight to distributed renewable energy.
The opportunity there. And I want to turn to the investor in the room here. Harold Bjugstad-Holm, what's better? Solar, wind, which is a better investment?
Well, first of all, I want to comment on this, because I think it's what everybody thinks about now is which is the path going forward. Is it going to be linear? Is it going to be exponential? I think humans have a limited capacity in their minds to think linear. We have gone this way, so the ones following us is going to go the same way. I don't think that's going to happen. So the risk is getting bigger. There's going to be higher volatility in the oil price. It's going to be high in the future, and it's going to be low. It's going to be fluctuating, and there's huge pollution issues involved. At the same time, you see greater opportunities. Solar prices are getting lower. Norway's largest...
So help us with that. How low are they really getting? Are they really that profitable now, solar panels?
They're, as Eric Solheim mentioned, they're getting competitive with coal first and foremost, but also
with subsidies from governments or without?
No, without.
Thank you. And at the same time, you see Norway's largest oil producer, Statoil, is going into the wind sector and is, as we encourage them to do, become a more and more renewable company. Because we as an investor can challenge the companies we own, we invest in. How do you use your capital? Do you reinvest in fossil projects, or do you use that capital to go into new areas, profitable areas, and sustainable areas?
Lauren Blackford, the debate on the radio in France has been, how come when we make the switch to renewables, they put these wind farms in my district? And why don't they put them in the districts of the rich people?
Well, some people are starting to want the wind energy in their district. You have in the United States with farmers that are starting to go out of business because their farming is no longer financially viable. They put windmills on their farms, and it's an economic driver. So a lot of it is how you do it. Just individually, I've been investing in community-scale renewables, and so that's working with communities that do want that renewable energy.
And are they happy to have wind farms?
It depends on the type of the wind farms, and it depends on the siting. But renewable energy now is creating jobs. And so whereas fossil fuels create relatively small number of actual jobs, a lot of it's mechanized, renewable energy already creates many more jobs. And so a lot of communities that are economically strapped are looking to renewables as a source of an economic driver of new jobs for their communities.
Lauren, we mentioned at the outset how many Americans, including yourself, are represented here in Paris. We saw Bill Gates speaking. There's Michael Bloomberg. There's the governor of California. There's a whole host of people. Not the president of the United States. He's represented by the chargé d'affaires at the embassy here in Paris. Of course, Donald Trump wasn't invited. Did Emmanuel Macron overplay his hand a bit in, with his "Make the Planet Great Again," the bit of a dig, inviting U.S. scientists to come study here? Did he go too far?
Personally, I think it's fair game. I think that we need to hold the U.S. accountable. We are doing it within the United States, civil society, businesses, mayors, and governors. When Trump announced that he was going to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement, we had a huge swell of responses from local governments, from businesses, from universities, from individuals. And now we can't let the United States backslide. So we're working within, but we're also looking to other governments to say, you have to meet those targets, and we can meet them. We're already more than halfway there with all the coal that's been retired. So don't let the United States off the hook.
Don't let the United States off the hook. Eric Solheim, when the Trump administration cancels 2 out of the $3 billion it had pledged for the Green Climate Fund, how much of an impact does that have?
much less than the fact that the price of solar and wind now can compete on commercial terms with coal everywhere in the world, because that's, of course, much more important for the developing world than aid can ever be. But we want the United States to contribute. Let me also pay a little bit of tribute to the Trump administration, because there have been now 3 major environment events of the 3 last week. First, the Bonn Climate Convention, then in Montreal, Canada, about the Montreal Protocol, which is, of course, very successful, and then we had in Nairobi the United Nations Environment Assembly. All 3 events, the United States participated. They made no havoc, no attempt to destroy it, and played ball.
Hang on, you said they made no attempt to destroy it. Didn't in Bonn they have this like environmentally friendly coal conference on the sidelines?
They had that, but who took it seriously? Basically, no one.
It was a provocation.
It was a provocation which just engaged, I mean, made all others more engaged. But true, I mean, the leadership has passed on. The leadership is now... China is number 1 on leadership. India, Europe, and Macron and Merkel, others are leading, but the United States have done nothing to destroy it, and that's also very important. But of course, in the United States, the leadership is now basically with civil society, with the state of California, and with private sector. All the iconic companies of modern capitalism, the Microsoft, the Apple, the Amazon, the Googles, all of them say, we happen to disagree with you, Mr. President. We will move ahead in the green direction because it's good business for us.
Vikram Wij, World Bank, IFC, based in Washington. Is it all just noise to you when he hires a climate skeptic to head the Environmental Protection Agency?
Look, the U.S. is the largest shareholder for IFC, and also so it's regrettable from where we sit because of the leadership issues that Eric referred to. I think every country, the U.S. as the largest economy in the world, the second largest emitter, needed to continue in order to build the momentum, primarily because our focus is on emerging markets. We have seen nothing that has distorted or shifted our own agenda, our focus on meeting by 2020, the World Bank Group, which includes both World Bank and IFC, is committed to having 28% of all its commitments be climate friendly. There has been no shift in that strategy. There, as you saw today, we announced exiting upstream oil and gas. So the whole idea is that we are continuing to build this into our strategy, into how we operate and going forward. Yes, the leadership vacuum is being filled, as vacuums tend to be. And so in that sense, we are not seeing any particular influence on how we are conducting our business and proceeding with what we want to accomplish with our emerging markets. The risk, of course, is that this might give some of the emerging markets the idea that, okay, if the big kahuna in the, and I guess that's just a reference to a big wave in Hawaii, in the room is not going to play ball in the Paris Agreement, does it give them an out? And the hope is no. So far, the rest of the countries are sticking together. And today, behind you, is a phenomenal example of that momentum.
Yeah, because when the deal was signed 2 years ago, did you think, oh, we're going to need, law enforcers for this? How to get 190, it's easy to get 195 countries to sign on to a document that says, let's save the planet. But how do you enforce it?
You don't, because it's voluntary. And that is the beauty of the Paris Agreement, that every country stepped up and said, this is what we would like to do for our own sake. And that works? And that will hopefully work. Time will tell. And the expectation is that with appropriate support for the appropriate kind of policies, regulatory frameworks, and financing to help them get on with their development is really where the task lies. So, yeah, I think it'll stick.
You think it'll stick? Vikram Wij, Harold Bugstad-Holm, Lauren Blackford, Eric Solheim. Stay with us because now it's time for Media Watch. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
One man has stolen the show at the summit.
Yes, absolutely. After all of his careful planning, Emmanuel Macron has been really upstaged, I think it's fair to say, by, admittedly, a Hollywood star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, the former governor of California too, and now very much a green advocate. When you look on social media, everything is talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger. France diplomacy tweeting this, saying that he has arrived at the One Planet Summit. We must all work together for the only planet we've got. And it's almost like he's arrived, now we can get on with it. Looking elsewhere, Arnold saying it's selfie time at the One Planet Summit, pointing to this image here, which shows that this is quite a showbiz occasion, because if you look on the right-hand side there, the blonde lady, who's normally dark-haired, Marion Cotillard, the Oscar-winning actress, of course, posing for a photo. Nicolas Hulot there, of course, the minister in charge of these kind of matters, and a blonde lady who I don't know who she is, actually, I have to confess, but there we go, I'm sure she's frightfully important. But it's interesting to see that he really has seized the opportunity for, let's say, playing with the press. This PR opportunity is the one that really has everybody talking. Arnold Schwarzenegger arriving at the Hôtel de Ville in Paris on one of those free bikes, the Vélib'. He's very well coordinated with his tie matching the bicycle. Lots of people pointing that one out on Twitter. Anne Hidalgo tweeted this, saying that she was pleased, absolutely pleased to welcome him back in Paris. Cities and regions of all over the world are together to defend air quality.
Lauren, you agree? Schwarzenegger, the star of the show?
There are many stars of the show, but he is a wonderful leader.
All right, it wasn't just the photo op, by the way, that...
No, absolutely. Before we move on, though, some people have questioned the green credentials of both of those two people, Anne Hidalgo, the Paris mayor, and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
This is true.
This Twitter user saying, asking Anne Hidalgo how she got there to welcome him. Did she arrive by bike or by car? Because she is quite well known for taking fairly short journeys by car. And this Twitter user talking about the fact that she's actually done a lot to create traffic jams in Paris, wondering whether this came up in discussions with Arnold Schwarzenegger, because, of course, she's closed lanes alongside the River Seine, for example, to create bike paths, which seems like a great idea, but it ups the amount of congestion, which then ups the amount of pollution. And so it is a viable question to ask.
And also, people, because there are fewer parking spaces in Paris, they drive around more looking for a space. Pollution's gone up. You're Eric Solheim, you're reducing the number of car lanes. Is it? Do you need to think it through before you order him?
May I make a suggestion? Learn from China. Bike sharing is taken off in China in a way no one thought possible. Some of these companies have millions upon millions of bikes, no station for them. You can just go pick them up in the street, take them to your grandmother or to your school or workplace, park it there and take another one, and you pay 10 cents per ride. And this is not taking off in the world. These companies are coming everywhere. They have technology which are better than the Europeans, so import them to Paris. And of course, you can have parked hundreds of bikes for every car you park, or for a few cars.
Yes, because it is undoubtedly a problem here in the capital. If you are in a car and you're trying to find a car parking space, those pesky Vélibes do take up an awful lot of space that used to be available for car parking. The other thing that some people have pointed out, this Twitter user in particular, digging up an old article from the UK's Telegraph newspaper, saying this is the same guy who did a 720-mile daily commute by private jet. It may seem a little
He's got a big digital footprint.
Well, yes, absolutely. That carbon footprint is telling. And this person pointing out that the broom wagon that was behind
It's a cycling expression.
It is a cycling expression. In those cycle races, they always have a car following along that sort of picks up the stragglers and anyone who's struggling or injured or whatever. And you do have to wonder, were those cars electric? I don't know. And final word on this photo opportunity anyway. Somebody had to make this joke. I'll be bike. Of course, Schwarzenegger there looking resplendent in his green tie. But just very quickly, of course, it wasn't just about the photo opportunities, as you say. He did give a speech. It was very much preaching to the converted. And obviously R20, which is actually the foundation that he he actually founded himself. They say that it was a great speech. Nothing is impossible. Go green. But yes, that is the foundation he created with the use of UN funds to help fund green infrastructure projects. But going into that speech in more detail, a lot of people pointing out or picking out this particular quote: Donald Trump didn't pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement. Donald Trump pulled Donald Trump out of the Paris Agreement. However, in the actual meat of his speech, really what he's talking about is very much pollution. Pollution is the big thing, because as far as Arnold Schwarzenegger is concerned, a lot of people really don't understand what climate change or global warming really means. But what people do understand is the real world effects. And lots of people bringing up this old article from The Guardian from earlier this year. It was a huge survey that was done, the biggest of its kind, that found that 9 million people a year die as a result of pollution.
Vikram,
this is exactly what we were talking about, right? I was there in the room when he said that, and this goes back to your question earlier. How are we going to avoid it and how are we going to prevent it? Now, if you look at just the headline, costs trillions of dollars a year, if you can avoid that in the future. So, can we bring that money forward? Like I said, issue a bond, nicknamed it a Breathe Better bond. Look at that picture behind you. Who would not want to do that? And what you end up doing is looking at future savings, spending the money today in order to avoid that. You improve life quality, you improve life longevity, and of course, you end up saving a lot of money.
All right, that'll be the final word for now. I want to thank you, Emma James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.